Hello! I would be very pleased if you would like the video. Subscribe so you don't miss new videos every day that will help you relax. I'm also curious where you are listening to me from and what time it is now. Write it in the comments. Enjoy watching! The first light of dawn crept over the Dnipro River, casting long golden streaks across the still waters. A cold mist clung to the reeds, and the faint cry of a heron echoed from the far bank. The Zaporizhian Sich began to stir, a wooden fortress alive with men hardened by war and freedom. Roosters crowed within the stockade, followed by the rhythmic clank of a bell calling the Cossacks to rise. Inside low huts made of logs and clay, men wrapped in coarse woolen blankets awoke from uneasy dreams. The air smelled of smoke, salt fish, and tar from the boats moored below the palisade. Ivan Koval, a seasoned Cossack of the Mrhorod regiment, opened his eyes to the faint light seeping through the cracks of his Kurin's door. He had slept little. The wind had howled all night from the steppes. Rising from his cot, he reached for his shapka and sheepskin coat, then stepped outside into the chill morning air. The Sich stretched before him, a maze of huts, workshops, and stables surrounded by tall palisades. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and men were already gathering near the central square where the church stood, its small golden dome glinting in the rising sun. Ivan made the sign of the cross and whispered a brief prayer. Religion was woven deeply into the life of the Cossacks. Before any deed, great or small, they prayed, not as monks but as warriors who trusted both in God and their sabres. Soon, the call to prayer echoed across the camp, and men began filing toward the wooden church of St. Nicholas, their boots crunching on the frosty ground. Inside the small church, the air was heavy with the scent of wax and incense. The priest, a bearded man in worn vestments, led the short service. Dozens of men bowed their heads, their faces illuminated by flickering candlelight. Some bore scars from old battles. Others were barely more than boys who had fled serfdom to join the Brotherhood of Free Men. When the prayers ended, the men emerged into the crisp daylight. The sun had risen above the horizon, bathing the Sich in warm hues. Now began the day's true business. Some headed to the stables to tend their horses, others to the armory to sharpen sabres or repair muskets. The clang of metal soon filled the air. Ivan walked toward the blacksmith's forge. Sparks danced as the blacksmith, an enormous man named Pavlo, hammered a red-hot horseshoe into shape. The rhythmic sound was steady, powerful, the heartbeat of the Sich itself. Around them, young Cossacks practiced with spears and sabres, their movements sharp and disciplined. The Sich was not only a fortress, it was a republic of warriors. Every man here was equal, bound by oath and tradition. There were no kings, no nobles. Authority rested with the Rada, the Council of Cossacks, where every voice could be heard. Even the Koshevoy Otaman, the elected leader, could be replaced by the will of the host. Ivan watched as a group of newcomers trained under the watchful eye of an old veteran named Stepan. The recruits, still clumsy, struggled to handle their long muskets. Stepan barked orders, occasionally whacking a careless youth with a wooden stick. "If you can't hold your weapon steady," he shouted, "you'll never stand against the Turks." Training was relentless. Every man was expected to master riding, shooting, and hand-to-hand combat. Beyond the walls lay endless dangers: Tatar raids, Ottoman patrols, and treacherous steppes. The Sich survived only because its men were always ready to fight. By mid-morning, the camp was alive with sound. The thud of axes echoed from the riverbank where men were repairing boats. Light, swift chakes built for war on the water. The smell of tar mixed with that of freshly cut pine. Along the river, fishermen hauled in nets heavy with silver carp and pike. Their laughter carried on the breeze. Nearby, women from nearby villages, rare visitors, allowed only for trade, had set up stalls beyond the gates. They sold bread, honey, salt, and cloth. A few older Cossacks bartered for goods, trading smoked fish or furs. Life here was rough, but not joyless, even amid discipline. There was freedom and camaraderie. Ivan joined several comrades by the river for a quick meal. They sat on overturned barrels, tearing chunks of bread and salted pork, washing it down with a sip of horilka. The drink burned warmly in his throat. "To the Sich," said Pavlo, raising his cup. "To freedom," Ivan replied. For a moment, they were simply men, not soldiers, not outlaws, but brothers under the same sky. Yet everyone knew peace never lasted long. Scouts had reported movement across the steppe. Rumors spread of Tatar riders gathering beyond the horizon. The Sich had to be ready at all times. After breakfast, the call of a drum rolled through the camp, the signal to assemble at the square. The men straightened their belts, checked their weapons, and made their way to the council ground. At its center stood the tall wooden cross of St. Nicholas, and beside it, the platform for the Ottoman. The Koshevoy Ottoman that season was Ryhori Loboda, a man of fierce eyes and calm voice. He climbed the platform and raised his hand for silence. "Brothers," he began, "news has come from the border. The Tatars raid again near the Inhul River. The hetman of Kiev calls for aid. What say the Sich?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Some shouted for war, others for caution. The Rada was never silent. Every man spoke his mind. Cossacks argued passionately, their deep voices rising like thunder. Freedom meant not only bearing arms but having the right to decide when and why to use them. Ivan listened quietly, his mind already weighing possibilities. He had fought the Tatars before. He knew their cunning and their speed. Yet to refuse aid would dishonor the name of the Zaporizhian host. Slowly, one by one, the voices turned toward agreement. The decision was clear. They would march. The Ottoman raised his hand once more. "Then let it be so," he declared. "Tomorrow, we prepare for the campaign. Sharpen your sabers, mend your saddles, and pray for strength. God and the Dnipro shall guide us." A cheer rose from the assembled men, a deep, roaring sound that shook the square. The drums beat again, echoing across the steppe. War was coming, and the Cossacks would meet it as they always had, with faith, fire, and steel. As the Rada dispersed, Ivan remained standing, watching the river shimmer under the noon sun. He felt the old thrill of purpose stir within him. Life on the Sich was harsh, but it was life worth living, free, proud, and unbound by tyranny. He turned back toward his Karen, passing rows of huts where men were already preparing for the campaign. Some repaired armor, others tended to powder flasks or patch-worn saddles. The clang of work filled the air once more, blending with laughter, curses, and the distant song of a kobzer. Near the gate, an old bard strummed his bandura, singing of past glories, of battles at Khotin, of the Dnipro raids, of comrades lost to the sea. The younger Cossacks listened with wide eyes, their blood burning with dreams of valor. Ivan paused, removed his cap, and listened in silence. The song ended, and the bard nodded to him. "You've seen much, brother," the old man said. Ivan replied quietly, "and yet the steppe still calls." The bard smiled, his eyes gleaming. "Then ride while you can, Cossack. The wind favors those who fear nothing." The sun climbed higher, scattering the morning mist. The day had begun in earnest, a day like countless others, yet each one precious in the endless rhythm of the Sich. For the Cossacks, every dawn was both a promise and a challenge, to live free, to fight bravely, and to die with honor. By midday, the Zaporizhian Sich was a whirlwind of motion and noise. The sound of hammers striking iron, the neighing of horses, and the shouted orders of the starshina echoed through the air. Dust rose from the square as hundreds of Cossacks busied themselves with preparations for the campaign. The smell of sweat, smoke, and fresh-cut pine mingled with the river breeze. Ivan Koval strode through the camp with purpose. His leather belt bore the marks of years in the saddle, and his sabre swung lightly at his hip. Around him, men were sharpening blades, mending boots, and rolling up spare shirts of coarse linen. Each Cossack was responsible for his own readiness. There was no army quartermaster here, only self-reliance and brotherhood. In one corner of the square, two young men argued over a horse's harness, their words sharp but not angry. Such quarrels were common and quickly forgotten. The Sich was full of strong wills and fierce hearts, men who had known slavery, loss, and exile before finding freedom behind these palisades. Here, pride was both a weapon and a shield. At the stables, rows of small but sturdy steppe horses snorted and pawed at the ground. These animals were the lifeblood of the host, swift, enduring, and trained to respond to the lightest touch of the reins. Ivan ran his hand down the neck of his gray mare, Luna. "You and I again, old friend," he murmured. The horse whinnied softly in reply. Further down by the river, Carpenters worked feverishly on the chaikas, the long, shallow boats that carried Cossacks into battle along the Dnipro and the Black Sea. Their hulls were built of oak and pine, reinforced with iron nails and tarred hemp. The men worked in rhythm, passing planks and ropes, their shirts soaked with sweat under the bright sun. The Ottoman had ordered half the fleet prepared. Scouts would sail ahead to watch the steppes waterways while the rest of the host advanced by land. Flexibility was the Cossacks' greatest strength. They struck like wind and vanished before their enemies could grasp them. Ivan remembered the last campaign. Swift raids across the estuaries, villages freed, and Ottoman garrisons burned to ash. Near the forge, Pavlo the blacksmith hammered out new spearheads while his apprentice pumped the bellows. Sparks flew, dancing like fireflies in the dim light. Each weapon was inspected carefully. A dull edge could mean death. "Take care with your work," Pavlo grumbled. "A Cossack's steel must be truer than his word." His apprentice nodded, sweat dripping from his brow. Across the courtyard, cooks were preparing the midday meal. Massive iron pots simmered over open fires, filled with barley, onions, and chunks of dried meat. The scent drifted through the camp, reminding every man that war or peace, a soldier still needed to eat. Ivan joined a group of comrades sitting on wooden benches beneath a makeshift awning. "Eat while you can," said Stepan, the old veteran. "Tomorrow we may dine under Tatar arrows." The men laughed, though each knew it was no jest. They tore bread, shared spoons, and talked of home, though few still had homes to speak of. The Sich itself had become their family, their refuge, and their destiny. After eating, the men gathered at the armory for inspection. An elder Cossack, gray-bearded and stern, checked every musket and sabre. Powder horns were refilled, and ammunition carefully counted. The Zaporizhians prided themselves on discipline. Though free, they followed strict codes in battle. Cowardice, theft, or drunkenness on duty were punished swiftly, sometimes by the whip or even death. The sun beat down relentlessly, and sweat gleamed on bronzed faces. Yet no one complained. The Cossack way of life was built on endurance, of hunger, heat, and hardship. To falter was to be unworthy of freedom. Better to die standing, went their saying, than to live on your knees. By early afternoon, a group of Cossacks assembled at the shooting range beyond the fortress wall. They carried long-barreled muskets, known as samopals, and practiced their aim at wooden targets shaped like Ottoman soldiers. The air cracked with the sound of gunfire, smoke rising in white clouds. Ivan took his turn, steadying his weapon, and fired. The target's head splintered clean off. The others cheered. Firearms had become the pride of the Cossack arsenal. Though their ancestors once fought with bows and sabers alone, the Zaporizhians were quick to master powder and shot. Every man here was both horseman and marksman, a combination that made them feared across the steppe. The Turks called them sea devils, for they struck from nowhere and vanished into the horizon. When practice ended, Ivan wiped his brow and sat on the grass. From here, the steppe stretched endlessly, a golden ocean of grass under the blue sky. Somewhere out there, enemy scouts might already be watching. The silence of the vast plains was deceptive. Danger could rise like a storm at any hour. Yet he felt no fear, only the calm certainty of one who had chosen his fate. A group of boys, barely 16, approached with wooden staves, imitating duels. They swung clumsily, laughing, until one tripped and fell. Ivan chuckled and stood. "Balance, not force," he said, demonstrating a smooth cut with his sabre. "Strike from your core, and your blade will sing." The boys watched in awe, repeating the motion. The Cossack host trained its future even in laughter. Near the main gate, guards stood watch with long pikes, scanning the horizon. Their eyes were sharp, their stance alert. The Sich was peaceful today, but every man knew how quickly peace could burn. In the distance, dark clouds gathered, a storm brewing over the steppe. Ivan glanced up and muttered, perhaps a sign. As afternoon deepened, the Rada reconvened to plan the route of march. Maps were spread across rough tables, hand-drawn sketches of rivers, ridges, and enemy camps. The Ottoman, Loboda, leaned over them, surrounded by his officers. "We move at dawn," he said. "Our scouts will take the river path. The main force marches southwest. Remember, silence and speed." Cossack warfare relied on cunning and mobility. They fought not in massive ranks but in swift detachments, striking where least expected. Their enemies, Ottomans, Tatars, or Poles, often underestimated their discipline beneath the rugged appearance. Yet the Sich was a school of strategy, its leaders both warriors and tacticians. As orders were given, runners dashed off to each kuren with messages. Drums rolled again, not for war, but for organization. Each regiment began preparing its supplies: dried meat, flour, salt, and powder. The camp buzzed with focused energy. Even laughter carried a sharper edge now, the anticipation before battle. By late afternoon, Ivan visited the chapel once more. Inside, the priest was blessing banners, crimson and blue standards embroidered with crosses and saints. The Cossacks would carry them into battle as symbols of faith and unity. Ivan knelt briefly, whispering a prayer not for victory, but for courage. "Lord, let me stand firm," he murmured. "If I fall, may it be with honor." When he stepped outside, the sky had darkened with the promise of rain. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The men hurried to cover their supplies and tie down the horses. Storms on the steppe could strike with brutal suddenness, tearing tents and capsizing boats. Yet even as the wind picked up, some Cossacks laughed, daring the sky itself to challenge them. Rain began to fall, first as scattered drops, then as a steady downpour. The camp shimmered with wet wood and mud. Men huddled under awnings, playing dice or singing to keep their spirits high. Somewhere, a Kobzar song rose again, this time slower, deeper, a hymn to comrades fallen in foreign lands. The melody mingled with the rain, haunting and proud. Ivan sat by the fire with a few friends, their cloaks steaming in the damp air. "Tomorrow," said one, "we ride again. I wonder how many of us will return." Ivan looked into the flames. "It doesn't matter," he replied softly. "We live as free men. That's more than most ever have." The others nodded in solemn agreement. As the storm eased, a rainbow arched faintly across the horizon, glowing above the river. The sun dipped low, painting the clouds in crimson and gold. The day's labors were nearly done, but the camp remained restless, sharpened by anticipation. Tonight they would feast, sing, and pray before the dawn march. The drums beat once more, a signal for evening assembly. The Ottoman addressed the men from the square, his voice echoing over the wet earth. "Brothers of the Dnipro," he said, "tonight we stand as one host. Remember your vows, to God, to freedom, to each other. Tomorrow we march not for plunder, but for the honor of the Sich." A thunderous roar answered him. Sabres flashed in the fading light, lifted high in salute. The storm clouds parted just enough for a final blaze of sunlight to fall upon the men, a golden fire over steel and resolve. Ivan felt his heart swell. This was what it meant to live as a Cossack, to serve no master but one's own soul, to stand shoulder to shoulder with brothers, unbreakable and free. The sun vanished beyond the horizon. Night would soon descend over the river, and with it, the last quiet hours before the campaign. But for now, the Sich stood alive with song, flame, and unyielding spirit, a fortress not merely of wood, but of will. The sun had barely dipped below the horizon when the torches were lit across the Sich. Their warm glow shimmered on the damp earth left by the afternoon rain, casting golden reflections on puddles between the huts. Smoke from the cooking fires mingled with the evening mist, rising toward the darkening sky. The fortress felt alive, humming with energy, expectation, and the pulse of men ready for war. Ivan Koval stood on the rampart, gazing across the Dnipro. The wide river glimmered faintly under the emerging moon, its surface rippling with the night breeze. Somewhere far beyond those waters lay the steppes, silent and vast, where tomorrow's journey would begin. He took a deep breath of the cool air. It smelled of rain, ash, and freedom, the scent of a life chosen, not given. Behind him, the sounds of celebration began to rise. Laughter, song, and the rhythmic beat of drums echoed from the central square. It was tradition. Before every campaign, the Cossacks feasted together. No man knew who would live to see the next dawn, so they made this night one of remembrance and joy. Ivan turned and descended from the rampart toward the light. At the square, dozens of fires burned bright. Around them, men sat on benches or logs, eating from wooden bowls and drinking from rough clay cups. The cooks had outdone themselves. roasted pork, fish from the Dnipro, and loaves of bread baked earlier that day. Horilka flowed freely, its sharp scent mingling with the aroma of smoke and meat. It was a feast worthy of warriors. The Kobzars had gathered too, wandering bards who carried the memory of the host in their songs. One began to pluck the strings of his bandura, his voice rising clear and strong. "Oh, ride the wind, ye sons of the steppe, where freedom's banner flies, for none shall bow their heads to chains, while Cossack hearts still rise." The men joined in the refrain, their deep voices rolling like thunder across the square. Even the old Ottoman sang, his tone rough but full of pride. Music bound them together, not as soldiers of conquest, but as brothers of fate. Each verse carried history, each chorus, defiance. Ivan sat among his comrades, raising a cup to the sky. "To the host," he said, his voice steady. "To the free men of the Dnipro." Around him, others echoed the toast. Cups clinked, laughter burst, and for a while, all fear was forgotten. The Sich glowed with firelight and fellowship, a fleeting paradise between wars. Nearby, young Cossacks challenged each other to contests of strength, arm wrestling, knife throwing, wrestling on the dirt. Cheers erupted each time a man fell or a blade struck its mark. These games were not mere sport but training in disguise. Even in revelry, discipline lingered beneath the laughter. To be a Cossack was to live with one hand always on the sabre. As the night deepened, the songs grew slower, more solemn. One Kobzar began a lament for fallen comrades, those who had never returned from sea raids or battles in the steppe. His voice trembled like the wind through reeds. No cross stands on their graves of sand. No mother weeps. No prayer is said. But Dnipro knows each hero's hand, and whispers peace to all the dead. Silence fell over the men. Even the most hardened among them bowed their heads. The flames flickered in their eyes, reflecting memories, friends lost, oaths kept, and the unspoken truth that death was always near. Ivan stared into the fire and saw faces from years past. Petro, struck by a Tatar arrow. Andrei, drowned in a storm. Countless others whose names lived only in song. After the song ended, Stepan, the old veteran, spoke quietly. "Remember this, brothers," he said. "We fight not for gold or land, but for the right to live as men. No tyrant commands us. No king owns our breath. That is worth every battle, every wound." The circle murmured in agreement. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of centuries. Soon after, the church bell rang, slow, deliberate. It was time for the evening prayer. The men rose, setting aside their cups, and made their way to the small wooden church of St. Nicholas. The torches lit their path as the wind rustled the banners above the gate. Inside, the priest stood before the altar, his hands raised. "Brothers," he said softly, "tomorrow, some of you may meet the Lord. Fear not, he rides with those who fight for freedom." The service was brief but powerful. The priest blessed each man with holy water, tracing the sign of the cross upon their brows. The Cossacks knelt, sabers laid beside them, symbols of both faith and defiance. Ivan closed his eyes, whispering a quiet plea, "Grant me strength, O Lord, not to falter." When they rose, the air seemed lighter, as if the very walls had absorbed their prayers. Outside, the night was calm. Stars pierced the darkness, shining like sparks across the vast sky. The storm had passed completely, leaving the air cool and clear. Fires still burned in the square, but their glow had softened to embers. Men spoke in hushed tones now, or sang quietly of home and hope. The frenzy of the feast had given way to reflection. Ivan walked toward the riverbank. The Dnipro moved silently, its surface glistening under the moonlight. He crouched and dipped his hand into the cold water, watching ripples spread outward. Many times he had done this before a campaign, a silent ritual, as if greeting an old ally. The river had carried the Cossacks to war and back for generations. It was their path, their witness, their mother. Footsteps approached behind him. It was Pavlo, the blacksmith, his face lit by the moon. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. Ivan shook his head. "No, tomorrow will come soon enough." Pavlo smiled faintly. "It always does. But tell me, Ivan, do you ever tire of it? The fighting, the wandering." Ivan thought for a long moment. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But what else is there for us? Freedom demands a price. And we are the ones willing to pay it. The two men stood in silence, watching the river flow. Somewhere upstream, a wolf howled, a distant, mournful sound. It echoed across the steppe, and Ivan felt a strange calm settle over him. The wolf was wild, unbound, and alone, much like the Cossacks themselves. He sings for us, Pablo said softly. For those who will never kneel. Ivan nodded. Aye, for those who never will. They returned to camp as the fires burned lower. Around the square, some men already slept on bedrolls or benches, their sabres within reach. Others sat awake, sharpening blades or whispering quiet farewells to friends. The air buzzed with unspoken emotion, courage, fear, longing, all woven together into the fabric of the night. Before retiring, Ivan visited the stable one last time. Luna greeted him with a soft nicker. He brushed her mane, whispering, "Tomorrow we ride, my girl." Fast and far. The horse nuzzled his shoulder as if in answer. He checked the saddle straps and tightened the girth, ensuring nothing was amiss. Every detail mattered. A loose buckle could mean death in battle. Back in his hut, Ivan lay down on his cot, his saber resting beside him. The flicker of a dying fire cast shadows across the walls, shapes that seemed to move like ghosts. He closed his eyes, but sleep came slowly. His mind replayed fragments of the day. The Ottoman's speech, the prayers, the songs. Tomorrow would bring blood and dust, yet he felt no dread, only readiness. Outside, the sounds of the Sich faded gradually. The last notes of a Kobzar song drifted through the air. Sleep, brothers. Sleep till dawn's first light. The steppe shall guard your rest tonight. For freedom's sons shall rise once more, when morning drums call men to war. The fire cracked once, and silence settled over the fortress. Above, the stars burned cold and eternal, watching over the sleeping warriors. The Dnipro murmured softly in the distance, a lullaby of flowing water and whispered history. Within its wooden walls, the Sich dreamed, alive with spirit and memory. Ivan's eyes finally closed. The night wrapped him in its cool embrace, and his last thought before sleep was simple, steady, and timeless. Better to die free than live enslaved. The wind sighed through the reeds, carrying that vow into the endless steppe. Before the first glimmer of dawn, a drum rolled softly through the mist. The sound, deep and steady, woke the sleeping Cossacks like the heartbeat of the steppe itself. One by one, men stirred from their cots, pulling on damp boots and woolen coats. The air was cold, sharp enough to bite the lungs. Beyond the palisade, the Dnipro lay still, wrapped in a shroud of fog. Ivan Koval rose and buckled his belt. His saber gleamed faintly in the dim light, freshly oiled the night before. Around him, his comrades moved with quiet purpose. No words wasted, no fear shown. Each man knew the rhythm of such mornings. This was not the beginning of glory. It was the continuation of a life built on vigilance, duty, and faith. The church bell tolled once, low and solemn. The priest appeared at the square, blessing the departing host. Candles flickered in the dawn breeze as men crossed themselves, murmuring short prayers. God guard us, someone whispered, and guide our hands, another answered. The voices faded into silence, swallowed by the fog. The horses stamped impatiently in their lines, snorting clouds of white vapor. Saddles creaked, sabers clinked, and the smell of leather and gunpowder filled the air. Ivan mounted Luna and patted her neck. "Steady, girl," he said softly. The mare flicked her ears, sensing the tension. All around, the sound of movement grew. Boots in mud, wheels turning, ropes tightening on the boats. The Ottoman, Ryhori Loboda, rode to the front, his red cloak fluttering in the chill wind. He lifted his mace, the symbol of his authority, and spoke clearly so all could hear. "Brothers, today we ride for the Dnipro and for the freedom of our land. The Tatars think to burn our villages and steal our people. We will show them that no flame burns hotter than a Cossack's wrath." A roar answered him. Fierce, unrestrained, the men struck their sabers against shields and muskets, shouting the ancient cry, "Slava! Slava Sich!" The fog trembled with the echo. The drums rolled again, and the first ranks began to move. The great wooden gates creaked open, revealing the vast, open steppe beyond, pale gold beneath the rising sun. The army divided as planned, One detachment marched along the riverbank with the Chekas following in the water, while the main force moved inland. Ivan's Karen rode in the center column. The landscape stretched endlessly before them, a sea of grass shimmering under the first light. The wind carried the smell of wild thyme and the faint cry of distant birds. For hours they rode in silence, save for the steady rhythm of hooves. Scouts fanned out ahead, scanning the horizon. Somewhere out there, the enemy moved, unseen but close. The steppe had its own language, the tilt of a hawk, the sudden flight of wild horses, the scent of smoke on the air. Ivan read these signs like scripture. He had lived too long on this land not to feel its pulse. By mid-morning, the sun rose high, burning off the fog. The Cossacks halted near a shallow ravine to rest the horses. Waterskins were passed around, and bits of dried bread and cheese were shared in silence. Stepan, the old veteran, squinted at the horizon. "They're near," he muttered. "The wind carries the stink of campfires." Ivan nodded grimly. "Then it begins soon." Moments later, a scout galloped back, his horse lathered with sweat. "Tatars, 2 miles east, at the river bend." The message spread like lightning. Orders were shouted, ranks formed. The men mounted swiftly, tightening reins and checking powder. The drums thundered again, faster now, urgent. Loboda raised his mace. "Forward, for the Sich!" The ground shook as hundreds of horses surged across the grass. Dust rose in clouds, and the Cossack host became a moving storm, banners snapping, sabres gleaming in the sun. Ahead, black dots appeared on the horizon. The Tatar riders, swift and fierce, their curved bows glinting. Both sides closed the distance with terrifying speed. The first volley came from the Cossack muskets. Smoke burst across the line, and the air filled with the roar of gunfire. Horses screamed, men shouted, arrows hissed through the haze. Ivan aimed carefully and fired. A rider tumbled from his saddle. He drew his sabre and charged, Luna leaping forward like lightning. The two armies met with a crash of steel and fury. The battle was chaos, a whirlwind of sound and motion. The clang of sabers, the thud of hooves, the cries of the wounded. Ivan slashed left and right, blocking an arrow with his shield, then struck down a man who lunged at him. Around him, the Cossacks fought like wolves, disciplined yet wild, each man moving with deadly precision. Their war cries tore through the wind. "Za volyu!" For freedom! The Tatars counterattacked with arrows and swift feints, circling like hawks. But the Cossacks held firm, using the terrain to their advantage. A detachment of musketeers fired from the ridge, cutting down advancing riders. Pavlo the blacksmith swung his heavy axe, clearing a path through the melee. Stepan, though old, fought like a demon, his sabre gleaming red in the sun. Ivan saw a Tatar leader ahead, tall, armored, shouting commands. He spurred Luna and charged. Their blades met with a ring that cut through the chaos. The enemy was fast, his curved sword flickering like light. Ivan parried once, twice, then struck low. The man fell, his horse rearing. The fight around them paused for a heartbeat, then erupted again with renewed fury. The clash lasted for what felt like hours but was scarcely won. Slowly, the Tatars began to break. The Cossacks pressed forward, driving them toward the river. Muskets fired one last volley, and the enemy ranks scattered into the reeds. Some drowned trying to cross the swift current, others fled into the steppe. The field was theirs. When the dust settled, silence returned. Heavy, almost sacred. The Cossacks dismounted, breathing hard. Smoke hung in the air, mingled with the scent of gunpowder and blood. Ivan wiped his blade clean and sheathed it. Around him, men tended to the wounded, gathering fallen comrades. Victory had come, but its price was visible on every face. The Ottoman rode among them, his cloak torn, his voice steady. "Brothers," he said, "the Lord has favored us this day. The Dnipro is safe, and the Tatars flee before our strength. Let us honor those who fell, for they live forever in the song of the Sich." The men bowed their heads as the priest began a brief prayer over the dead. Ivan knelt beside Stepan, who had taken a wound to the shoulder. The old man smiled weakly. "Still breathing," he muttered. Ivan grinned. "You'll outlive us all, old wolf." They laughed softly, the sound mingling with the murmur of the river nearby. The battle was over, but the spirit that had carried them into it burned brighter than ever. By afternoon, the wounded were tended, and the fallen laid in rows beneath simple wooden crosses. The Cossacks built a fire and shared water and bread, their first meal since dawn. No songs were sung yet, the air was too heavy with loss. But in every glance and every clasped hand, there was pride, fierce and unbroken. As the sun dipped low, turning the grass to gold, the Ottoman gathered the men once more. "We return to the Sich tomorrow," he said. "Tell the Dnipro that her sons have done their duty." A murmur of assent spread through the ranks. Some men began to sing softly, a hymn of homecoming, low and steady. The melody carried far across the steppe, mingling with the rustle of wind through the reeds. Ivan sat apart, staring at the horizon. The sky burned crimson, the color of victory, of sacrifice. He thought of the songs sung the night before, of the prayers whispered in darkness. He felt neither triumph nor sorrow, only the deep, steady calm of a man who had lived true to his oath. Tomorrow would bring another dawn, another struggle. Such was the way of the Cossack. As night fell, campfires sprang up once again. Men shared stories of bravery, toasted the fallen, and repaired their weapons by the flicker of flame. Laughter returned, softer but sincere. Life, as always, endured. The Dnipro flowed nearby, eternal and patient, whispering through its reeds like a mother comforting her sons. Ivan lay back on the grass, gazing at the stars. They seemed closer tonight, shining bright over the endless steppe. He closed his eyes and let the wind brush against his face. The battle, the pain, the glory, all faded into one truth that every Cossack carried in his heart. Freedom was worth every drop of blood. In the distance, the Kobzar began a song, slow and proud. Where the Dnipro meets the boundless sky, the sons of freedom live and die. Their names the river will recall, for liberty belongs to all. The melody rose into the night, carried by the wind across the plains, across time itself. Tomorrow, they would return to the Sich, to rebuild, to rest, to laugh again. But tonight, beneath the stars and the whispering river, they were eternal.